Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our live chat for August 2nd, 2023. I hope everyone is doing well out there. We have a lot to talk about this evening. So let's see, let's number off a couple of things. The tropical Atlantic, breakdown of thunderstorms for this Friday. Oh, and the winter coming up. I'm going to give some of my preliminary thoughts on what I'm seeing in the pattern, what I'm seeing in the observations, and what that could mean as we look at the winter. This isn't a concrete winter forecast. I know one outlet has already put out a winter forecast, which I think is jumping the gun a bit, but I want to share some of the things that I'm watching and give my thoughts on some of the features that I think are going to have a significant impact on the winter forecast and things I'm going to be looking for. So first things first, and of course, hello everyone out there. I can see everyone coming into the chat room. Of course, as always, we'll be answering questions first in the premium section and then in the YouTube section. We'll see if anything pops up on Twitter as well, as this is live on Twitter, and we'll go from there. Oh yeah, tomorrow's my birthday, so I might be taking a little bit early siesta on this one. We'll see how the questions come through. But for now, let's take a look at the tropics. Not much going on. Okay, so there was a lot of talk about this disturbance right here. In fact, the NHC put up about an 80% potential of development. It's now around 10%. The thing is, there's a lot of leaning on model guidance, and this push to jump the gun with the forecast of these tropical systems, especially with the factor involved with the idea that because we have a lot of warm Atlantic water, that we'll see a lot of tropical systems. Warm water is part of the equation, no doubt about that. And the thing is, once we get a tropical system developed, then from there, then the warm water really matters quite a bit. But if you have a lot of dry air and shear, not so much. And that's what we keep on seeing. So far we're up to, let's see, 4 named storms. 5 if you count that one in January, which was a weird hybrid, but some people are counting it. And other than that, we really haven't seen a lot of activity. Certainly not to the extent that was expected. Now, to be fair, we are in August now, so we should see an uptick in activity. But then I saw this. This right here is a lot of dry air. It's a lot of dust coming off the Sahara Desert. Typically in El Nino years, this is increased, but this is a bit off the charts here for August. And normally I see this in June and July, at least a quiet time period, and you get a bit of a break. That's why it's a lot lower to see the activity in the Atlantic, especially in the Cape Verde seasons, which is out here. Okay, so Cape Verde season is when you have these tropical waves intensify, and this is the Cape Verde Islands, and then they track through the Atlantic, intensify, and become major hurricanes. This year, we have a lot of dust and a lot of dry air. So the best way to consider the dust is like diamond dust, right? When you have a baseball game, you're trying to get the infield dry, they just have this diamond dust that sucks up all the moisture. Well, this is the atmosphere's version of diamond dust. It dries up everything as far as tropical moisture is concerned. And it really inhibits the development of tropical development. So you have this feature right here, for example, of intensification, but then it runs into all this dry air and collapses. So that's essentially what happened with this disturbance. And a lot of model guys were suggesting that, and even the European, which was a little bit more aggressive than in previous other solutions, it even kept this storm relatively weak. Maybe a category, maybe a weak tropical storm at most. So it really wasn't all that impressive. So when we take a look at the model guidance over the next 10 days, not much really doing. And now we're getting into mid-August at this point. And if you go even beyond that point in some of the ensemble guys, whether it's the GFS ensembles or the European ensembles, you're pretty much looking at an environment where not much is really expected to develop. I'm not really seeing a strong signal at all in the tropical Atlantic. Where I am seeing a strong signal is in the Pacific, and specifically the Western Pacific, which could lead to some interesting amplification as we head towards the middle and end of August, especially if you get a strong typhoon to lift up towards the northern Pacific. We don't have anything of that yet, but it's something I'm going to be keeping an eye on quite a bit. So not really seeing much in the tropics. The disturbance we're keeping an eye on is pretty much a dud. So not much really going on in that respect. So what about the pattern overall? Well, the pattern overall for the rest of August, as you would suspect, is being controlled by the development of our El Nino. As far as the sea surface temperatures, it's very strong in the east base, around 3 degrees Celsius, but that's starting to back off a bit. And around Nino 3.4, which is this area right here, that's typically where we measure El Nino. It's about a moderate El Nino at about 1.2, 1.3 in strength. So with that being the case, it's strong enough to have an impact, you would think. But when we take a look at the SOI values, not really all that impressive. The seasonal value is around minus 7.56. The monthly value is around minus 5.25. These are signals of a weak El Nino influence. Still influencing the pattern, but not really all that impressive. Daily contributions were pretty robust. We had 2 days of positive values, and then we went back to negative values, so it kind of counteracted itself. As far as the fastest drop, it's in our monthly values. So what does this all mean? Well, to me, what it's telling me is that there is a disconnect going on between the warm sea surface temperatures of El Nino and the atmospheric influence. There's a lot of debate as to what is causing that. And let me go back to our sea surface temperatures here. So there are some theories on this. The first theory is that because of all the warm water we're seeing in the Atlantic and in the northern Pacific here, that perhaps that is blunting the influence of El Nino and it's not producing the same lifting parameters. And you're seeing some of that in terms of the precipitation and the evolution of the convection, where we're seeing it a lot more here and a suppression here. Typically, when we study El Nino and we see an El Nino like the one that's developing now, you would get a lot more convection right around here. But we're not seeing that. So the idea is that maybe because of all the warm water here and the warm water here, that the rising motion we typically see with a strong El Nino, especially one where the focus is around 1 plus 2, or let's say 3, let's say right around here, has been displaced. Now, as a forecaster, I don't worry so much about the size or the strength of the El Nino. What I focus on is convection, okay? So when I look at the convection, I'm seeing a lot more focus around the date line. And it adds up really nicely and explains what we're seeing in the northern Pacific. Combine that with our sea surface temperatures. And now notice we have some warm waters here in the Indian Ocean. Not impressively warm. Far more impressively warm here in the northern Pacific. And far more impressively warm here in the northern Atlantic. You combine that with, of course, as we head towards fall, an increasing thermal gradient from the land to the ocean. And this starts to answer why we're starting to see what we're seeing with these upper level lows around the Aleutians and over North America. Combine all those factors with what we're seeing in the stratosphere, where the water vapor that has been lifted up into the stratosphere is creating a cooling effect throughout much of the stratosphere, but we're getting these warm pockets showing up. And you can see that very nicely here in the ozone evolution here. So you combine that with the falling QBO status, and let's see here. I think I pulled up that data as well. Here we are. So you're seeing a shift in the QBO as well. Now, you might be asking, what does this mean? Okay, so when the QBO is positive, which are these values here, that means it's going westerly. So your transport of heat is going along with the circulation of the Earth, okay? And it matches up with the angular momentum. When it goes into a negative state, it's going against the grain, so to speak. Why is that important? Well, it allows for a buildup of mass in the stratosphere and the upper troposphere and increases the potential for high latitude blocking. Now, these values are monitored around the equator at the stratospheric level, and we keep an eye on the values at 30 and 50 millibars. So what you want to watch for is that the state of the QBO goes from the upper portions of the stratosphere down to the lower portions of the stratosphere. So it descends like this. So these negative values supports more high latitude blocking. This explains why we're seeing this more and more. So you combine all these factors together, and it explains why we're seeing the pattern that we're seeing for much of August. And by the way, I'm not expecting much in the way of major heat waves coming out of this type of pattern. Again, it's a burst, but even the last heat wave where we were supposed to see 95s, 97 degree temperatures, we didn't see a lot of it. In fact, some locations completely busted and stayed in the upper 80s. So what can we learn from that? What we're learning from that is that the intensity of the heat is not as robust for the eastern United States. Plains is a different story. And you're seeing more and more short waves in the polar jet stream able to reach us because the polar jet stream is more amplified. And what's really been catching my eye is this feature right here. This feature is textbook for El Nino, but it's kind of early to see it this robust. When I see this, and I start to look at what's going to happen for the cold season months, if we continue to see this feature here, and we continue to see the convection around the Aleutian Islands, should I say around the dateline into the southwest of the Hawaiian Islands, then you open up the potential for more phasing events along the East Coast here, and an increased potential, not a guarantee, but an increased potential for more polar and Arctic air masses to reach the eastern United States. This pattern, preliminarily, and again, there's a lot of things I got to study here for this pattern going forward, especially for the fall and the winter, has the potential here for exceedingly very stormy conditions, and also the potential for much colder conditions, i.e. winter storms. With that said, the issues that I'm struggling with: one, not a typical textbook El Nino development. Two, this is the important thing, the influence of the water vapor once again in the stratosphere. That is now about roughly 130% above normal. That is high. And they're starting to get some more research on this factor. But there's so much we don't know because we've never seen this before. So how does the water vapor impact our stratosphere? Well, when the water vapor gets transported up into the northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere, it creates a overall cooling effect. So it raises the 500 millibar height. So you enhance your 500 millibar ridges. Now, that might sound like, hey, it looks like it's going to warm all over. Well, the atmosphere doesn't exactly work that way, okay? It's not a uniform warming. So what you increase then is the potential for these stronger ridges and stronger high pressure centers over the higher latitudes and mid latitudes, which means there has to be an equal and opposite reaction to that, which means you get more amplified troughs. like that one. Okay, now follow along with me here. Depending on the evolution of the various mass differentials in the stratosphere and the building up of heights around Greenland, if you continue this process going forward, you increase your potential for a negative NAO and a negative EPO. But, and here's the caveat that we have to watch for. If there is more of a buildup of that cooling effect over Europe, and it leads to a warming effect in the stratosphere around China and Asia, then that would lead to more below normal heights over Asia and more of a zonal component over much of the United States. If it flips the other way, where you have more enhancement of below normal heights around the Aleutians and around North America, game on. That I don't know yet. I'm still trying to figure that out and work with that. And a variety of different factors go into me figuring that out. The state of the sea ice, the state of the snow growth, of course, in Eurasia, and the evolution of the subtropical jet stream and how it's interacting with the polar jet stream as we move through fall. This is why I hold off on an official winter forecast until October, because all these factors, unless you're just relying on models and models alone, all these factors really cannot be analyzed until you get those observations by mid-October. And that's why usually I have a winter forecast out around October 26th, because by then you have all the observations to combine with the model guidance to move forward. Now, last year I said my confidence was low because I had no idea how to deal with the stratospheric component here, because I had never seen it before. This year, my confidence is a little bit higher, only because I learned what I experienced with the stratospheric influence. I have a better understanding. I have more research to go over and try to figure out how did all these components play up against each other. There's a lot of great research that's being done from Colorado State, I believe. So I'm very enthusiastic to really test the theories involved here. Volatility is still high, but I do not think you could take a textbook El Nino influence once again. I think what you need to do is study where the convection is setting up and go from there. So that's what I would suggest with that. So that's what I'm looking at as far as preliminary in that respect. In the meantime, we also have some severe weather we're watching. Now, when we take a look at the winds at the mid-levels, it's pretty quiet. We have a nice high-pressure system. The upper levels is featuring a trough that's off the East Coast, so pretty quiet, right? It's a nice, tranquil time period for us. This feature up here is what we're watching out for an enhancement of a shortwave. And what we're going to be shifting back to is an amplified pattern. So you're starting to see the trough here starting to deepen here. Right now it's in the Gulf of Alaska, but you can start to see around the Aleutians the setup starting to take shape here. So what's going to happen here is this trough is going to deepen. It's going to allow for this ridge to build. While that's happening, it's going to allow this feature up here to drop south. And as it's dropping south, it's going to start to form an upper level low, basically taking the place of this feature here that's lifting out. While all that is happening, this ridge complex is going to intensify. And so as this ridge complex intensifies and builds towards Greenland, the trough is going to deepen and drop further south, and that is going to transport a nice polar air mass right into our neck of the woods. We can see all that taking place right now with the upper level winds. Everything's starting to evolve. So we take that and we study the shortwave that's coming in here on Friday. And you can see on the model guidance that upper level low taking shape matches up very nicely with the current observations we're seeing. See that at 700 millibars, 850 millibars, plenty of PVA around the region. And then at 850 millibar temperatures, you can start to see that cold air transport trying to press south. Again, it's August, so it's not going to be that strong, but strong enough to instigate enough frontogenesis and enhancement of lifting. So you combine that with the winds that at this time period at 300 millibars are coming in from the west, at 500 millibars coming in from the west, but at 850 millibars coming in from the southwest and pretty strong. So I'm seeing the support for moisture transport. I'm seeing a hint of some vertical wind shear. So all of this is going to combine to set up some pretty good thunderstorms, I think, for the region. I'm studying the precipitable water value. One thing I find interesting is that it's starting to back off. I think that the model guidance, both the European and GFS, had some pretty significant convective feedback error, which produced this erroneous area of precipitable water values over 2.5 inches, which is gone now. So that pretty much confirms it was a convective feedback error. But still pretty good amount of moisture supports some heavier downpours and frequent lightning. And you can see here at 700 millibars, look at the moisture buildup on Friday afternoon. But the good news is on Saturday, look at that dry air coming in. So we're certainly improving in that respect. So it looks like, as I'm studying this, pull this up, the weekend is looking great. Friday is going to be stormy. The NAM right now kind of backed off on the convective potential, but I think it may be a little bit too overdone. And I think that the European guidance is a little bit over enhanced. So I kind of went in between here. Looking at scattered showers and thunderstorms, you could see a few isolated severe thunderstorms. And if they reach the potential of severe levels, I'm looking more for the heavy downpours, frequent lightning, wind gusts over 55 mile per hour type scenario. Is a tornado possible? I can't rule it out because of the vertical wind shear, but more likely than not, it's not going to happen. But we'll be keeping an eye on it. And if it does happen, it'd probably be around eastern Pennsylvania, western New Jersey, basically around the Delaware River Valley, right in this area, because that's where I'm seeing the strongest vertical wind shear on various models. So you have your jet core here at 850 millibars, and you have your westerly winds here at 500 millibars. So right around Trenton, right around that area, if you get a severe thunderstorm, if that could instigate enough lifting, enough vertical wind shear in a cyclonic motion to support a tornado, a weak one. But again, that's very low in potential. Other than that, this looks like a pretty good amount of bursts of heavy rain through Friday evening. So if you have plans on Friday afternoon and evening, you might want to develop a backup plan because it's going to be a bit stormy, I think, given these conditions. But again, if you have plans for the weekend, I'm going for the dry weekend. It's going to be quiet, beautiful, low humidity, and comfortable conditions overall. It is summer, so it's not going to be like in the 60s, but it's going to be pretty comfortable for this time of year. So now I pretty much covered what I wanted to cover. Now is the time to take your questions and say what we have here. And we have a lot of good questions here I'm seeing already. And we got, wow, a lot of good questions here on YouTube as well. So I will be answering them and doing the best I can. So Card is asking an important question here, looking at 250 millibars. We'll pull that up first. Okay, make sure we have 250 millibars up. There we go. Okay. The amplification cutoff highs and lows all over the place near Africa is a strong jet streak over the top of a high and stretched out over a double low center. So let's go back here. Okay, so you have an impressive block here around the Azores, and what I'm thinking here is that it's kind of acting like a feedback pattern, okay? Where you got this ridge here feeding this upper level low, which feeds this ridge, which feeds this upper level low. And you can literally see the winds all moving around these blocks constantly. This setup here is really hard to break. What you need is for the polar jet to come in and really break up this whole circulation. But you typically don't see that until you get to September, because then you start to get a deeper, stronger polar jet stream and is able to drop south. Because of that, it leads to this constant feedback, which as a result sets up the potential for your dust to come off the Sahara Desert and right into our neck of the woods right off of here, which is killing the potential for Atlantic development. All sorts of stuff going on elsewhere in the Atlantic, simply no space for anything really to develop. By the time it starts to get going, it runs into a buzzsaw of shear. Well, there's your shear. Shear isn't always just the winds going in the opposite direction. It can also be that the winds are going in the same direction as the wave, but too fast. So tropical waves like weak winds. Weak winds means that thunderstorms can build up and can really intensify. So if you have fast moving winds, the thunderstorms aren't able to build up to maximum height, and you disrupt the warm core process that sets up tropical low pressure systems. So anytime you get strong winds in either direction, but more so when they're the opposite direction of a wave, it really disrupts the development. So the tropical wave that we were watching here, the tropical disturbance, it's about to get ripped apart by this trough. I mean, completely annihilated. And even before that, I was skeptical that we'd see much of any type of development out of this because of the shear that was taking place right here and the amount of dry air. It just isn't an unfavorable environment, plain and simple. Indian Ocean does not look particularly warmer than normal. It's minor. It's not significant. Really, the areas that stand out is really the Northern Pacific and Northern Atlantic. Rob Allen asks, evening long range is getting interesting on the EPS with hurricanes and long range winter models. Exciting times ahead. Well, I would say this. The EPS is interesting. Let me see if I pull up that model guidance here. Here it is. So I was studying this, and what stands out to me is not so much tropical development, but this to me is a hallmark of a Western Atlantic ridge and cold fronts stalling out. So perhaps a wave of low pressure could be subtropical that tries to get itself act together around the middle of the month. Because of the warm water off the East Coast, you could certainly support the development of some sort of subtropical development. But also you have a lot of strong shear in place. You have that jet streak that's going to be sitting right along the East Coast. So that kind of argues against tropical development. So perhaps maybe a very low core, warm core low that is very low in the atmosphere. And maybe that's how you go with the subtropical influence. But the shear is going to make it really difficult to pull that off. But what stands out to me is that you have cold fronts that are stalling out here. So you increase your thermal gradient, you increase your frontogenesis, and then you have the Western Atlantic ridge just pumping up tropical moisture right along the East Coast. One thing's for sure, if you're looking for a dry, quiet period of weather, it's not happening. Okay, basically it's happening now, if you want to call it that. But this looks like an active pattern for the rest of the summer going into the fall. Reminder that nighttime has returned to northern polar regions, so more constant sun. That's true. That is true. So definitely it's going to start getting colder and colder. We're going to start to watch the snow growth, and we're going to watch the development of the polar vortex over the next couple of weeks. Given some of the heat waves this area has had, the most recent one was not particularly impressive. Yeah, I would agree. It definitely was less than I thought it was going to be. I was prepared to see multiple areas like around Newark, especially around Newark, pushing like 99, 98 degrees, maybe touching 100. Philadelphia maybe touching 100. None of that happened. And a variety of models were showing that potential, and it just didn't take place. So kind of impressed by that. Not as noticeable as now because part of the circulation on the west left side is weak and distorted, but the end of last week, 70 millibar had a weak paperclut polar vortex. Okay, I see what you're talking about. Okay, so let me pull up what he's talking about here. So let's zoom out, pull up towards the North Pole. And you had this very weak feature that was kind of taking place up around here. It's not, we're not there yet, but you're starting to see some of the signals here starting to show up here. Some weak circulation features showing up here, but it's not very strong right now. Give it a couple of weeks. I'd say probably by mid-September, you'll start to see more and more of a concrete and more of a sustained influence. Did you read about the meteor that created a fireball early this morning? Still have no idea where it came from. Not really my thing. So I really haven't checked it out. Non-weather note, if you want something that symbolizes Yankee season, I really, as a Met fan, I really can't say much about the Yankees. But I heard about Domingo German. I think I said that name right. But I hope that he gets the help he needs and everything works out well for him. But the way my season's going, who am I to say anything? Let's check out YouTube and see what we got here. We'll take the best questions. Got a long-range question about winter in New Jersey. What are some of the things that could make or break the snow season in New Jersey? Location of high latitude blocking. That's going to be the key, and that's directly connected to the evolution of the water vapor in the stratosphere and how that's going to work with El Nino. So once we get that circulation locked in and we get an idea of how that's going to evolve, then we can start to get a better idea on the potential for high latitude blocking. Now, unlike last year where we had a positive QBO state, which made high latitude blocking a little bit more difficult, this year we are going to have a negative QBO state, which increases your potential for stratospheric warming from the troposphere up to the stratosphere. So that could be something that we're going to be keeping an eye on. But that's going to be key. Yes, water vapor is there because of Tunga. That's why it's so interesting. This normally in volcanoes, right? When they erupt, they put up a lot of sulfur in the atmosphere, a lot of CO2, and that's how we get our impacts and some water vapor. This one, because it was under the ocean, shot up a ton of water vapor into the atmosphere. Now, initially, it was pretty much focused over the southern hemisphere and was starting to get to the equator by the time we got to last winter. And my thinking was, okay, there's clearly a mass imbalance here and a difference in the warming and cooling that's going on in the stratosphere, so there should be an enhancement of circulation, right? I got the circulation wrong because as the water vapor expanded into the northern hemisphere, it started to change the location of ridges and troughs and the way that the ridges amplified. And basically, it displaced everything off to the east, and then you know how our winter turned out. This year, it's already been established now. So we don't have to wait for any changes. It's there. So since it's there, now we have a better idea of how it's going to work with the stratosphere, and we should have a more stable forecasting environment than what we did last year. Let's see here. Do you think the pattern suggests that the South should... There's no way to figure out right now temperature patterns or anything of that nature. I'm very vague with it in October to begin with. I wouldn't even attempt it in August. We don't have enough information. Will the heat have an impact on the hurricane season for later this month? I would assume the heat you mean by the water temperatures. If you get a developing tropical low pressure system, I can certainly see the potential for a tropical system to rapidly intensify if it's in a favorable environment. So here's the deal. Here's what to look out for. First, the atmospheric environment has to be favorable. So let me pull this up. Okay, so if the atmospheric environment is favorable, let's say that we have an area of light shear and no significant dry air from the Caribbean to the Gulf of Mexico, okay? And you set up that environment. So then you can set up a tropical low pressure system to develop and get itself organized. Once it gets itself organized and developed, then you have all that warm water. And that warm water that is well above normal is like nitroglycerin. It is like jet fuel. It will allow your tropical low pressure system to maximize its potential and rapidly intensify. So, if conditions are favorable, you can easily feature a tropical system that goes from a tropical depression to a strong hurricane in a very short period of time because it has so much warm water to work with. But again, if it has shear, if there's a lot of dry air, that's going to inhibit it and weaken it. So right now, what makes this, in a way, kind of fortunate is that with El Nino, you have generally an unfavorable environment, which makes it very difficult for these tropical systems to develop. If we had a La Nina in place with this type of warm water in the Atlantic, I would be very concerned because then you would have light winds in the tropics, a ton of warm water. It would get interesting around here, around the Gulf Coast and the East Coast. But because of El Nino, it's kind of our saving grace and really protecting us. Let's take a look. Any flooding threat from the storms this Friday? Well, we definitely have a typical potential for flash flooding from these individual thunderstorms, especially off towards northeastern Pennsylvania, northern New Jersey, where we've seen a lot of rainfall over the past couple of weeks. The Hudson River Valley, because the ground is already super saturated in many locations. The individual thunderstorms themselves, I don't see a lot of enhanced precipitable rainfall rates because the precipitable water values, I mean, they're high for this time of year, but not excessive. If I was seeing rainfall rates over 2 inches per hour, then that would be a concern. But right now we're about 1.5 to 1.7, which isn't too bad overall for this type of environment for this time of year. So I don't really see anything that's excessive. But outstanding questions this evening. I'm taking a look at the Mets. It looks like something bad is already happening in the first inning. Wonderful. I am not going to be a happy camper over the next couple of seasons, I think. Jeez. Oh well. Can't beat the Royals. That's fun. So overall, what we could take from this weather pattern, and as we're studying it, is that this is still going to remain pretty active for this summer through the early part of fall. So August and September, you're going to see a lot of featuring of strong cold fronts moving through, which is actually really good news in terms of the tropical potential. If the cold fronts are going to be getting stronger faster, they're more likely to kick the tropical systems if they should develop off the coast faster. So that could be a saving grace for us in protecting us from any type of significant impacts. And got a couple more questions. Oh boy. All right, so we got a baseball question. As you know, I'm a baseball fan, so I will give my baseball answer. I get what the Mets are doing. And that you have to build a farm system in order to build sustained winning. I get it. I do. And I like the idea. Just don't tell me that, we're going to be getting like the third worst pitcher in free agency to fill up the rotation next year. That's all. That's all I'm asking. But I get it. The idea is to build up the farm system. They certainly did that. So we'll see where we go from there. If you want to know the results of just spending money and having a bad farm system, look at the Yankees. Sorry, guys. You haven't created much in the way of players, but then again, so have the Mets. So I get what they're trying to do. We'll see how it works out. And it is 8:40. I'm going to take a couple more questions and then we're going to call it early because I got Apple Crisp on the way. Celebrating my birthday. Oh, we got another question on YouTube? All right. Okay, I think I got that one. Well, the heat. I answered the heat one. What's the last question, hon?
You didn't adjust the sort order, did you?
I thought I did. Again, I have a good way of screwing that up.
Then it should be the very bottom.
Live chat. I got top chat was there. Live chat.
Somebody's asking about the Mets and why they traded Verlander.
Oh, I already answered that question. Yeah.
I just saw it, so.
So, actually, one more weather one. Oh, there we go. Okay. Why did the last stormy phase that we went through for the past few weeks post heat wave that New England had all the potential shear and tornado potential? Okay. The reason why is because of the location of the short waves. For the most part, the strongest portions of the short waves, which is typical for this time of year, were focused from the eastern Great Lakes through the St. Lawrence River Valley and New England. So they pretty much tracked from here. Let me see if I can zoom in here. So they moved from here to here. Now, this is typical for this time of year because the polar jet stream is at its furthest northern point. So you get your strongest short waves here, which means you get your strongest vertical wind shear, which increases your potential for severe thunderstorms more in New England. Now, as we move through the rest of summer towards fall, the polar jet stream is going to start to creep further south, and the potential for those strong short waves to move towards our neck of the woods will increase, and we'll have a higher potential for those strong thunderstorm impacts. With that being the case, at the same time, don't be surprised if the severe potential starts to decrease and the heavy rainfall potential increases, because the instability in the atmosphere will start to decrease, and we'll see more and more support for heavy rainfall events rather than severe thunderstorm events. Any 90 degrees for August? I can't rule it out. I mean, God, it's August, you know? So I cannot say no. Mets handled the trade deadline way better than the Yankees, and I'm a Yankee. I would agree. I don't understand what the Yankees are doing. The Yankees kind of like are halfway. Like, either go for it or don't. Which is the one thing I appreciate with the Mets. It wasn't I was left in limbo. I'm like, all right, it's not our year. We're going to trade. We're going to rebuild, all that stuff. The Yankee fan, I feel sorry for him because it's like you're kind of caught in limbo. You don't know where they're going. Any preliminary thoughts on the weather next week and weekend? We're going to have a cold front move through on Monday. That looks like scattered showers and thunderstorms. I don't see any type of strong, significant cold fronts or anything of that nature for Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. There's potential that will warm up into the upper 80s to lower 90s. I think, though, that the mild guidance is a little bit too aggressive with the 90-degree temperatures. So I'm kind of backing off on that. And I like the idea of, your typical summer heat, mid to upper 80s, maybe a spare 90 here and there in the Delaware River Valley. But I like the idea of your best potential for rainfall on Monday, and then we'll watch another cold front by the end of the week. In the middle of the week is generally quiet, with maybe an isolated shower or two via sea breeze front or something of that nature. The weekend, next weekend, it's a little bit far out, but I would definitely look for another wave of high pressure. We're kind of stuck in this pattern where our cold fronts are bookend on Fridays and Mondays, and we get tranquil conditions on Saturday and Sunday, which, quite frankly, I'll take, What's it looking like for Yankee Stadium Thursday and Friday? Let's see here. Friday's going to be rainfall and thunderstorms, so Thursday should be fine, but Friday probably won't look good. Okay, so Christian, basically, I don't know whether there'll be a hurricane or tropical storm. Those are mesoscale low pressure systems typically, so you don't really want to make any type of declaration of that. It would be irresponsible. But definitely we'll have, I think that we should have a August that will feature near to slightly above normal precipitation. Of course, if there is a tropical system, then you'll end up well above. And so with that, it's about 8:45. I'm going to call it a night because my voice is starting to go, and I'm going to get ready and enjoy the birthday celebration and get that going. So I'll take one more question, and then we're going to call it a night from our premium members. And let's see what we have here. So far, pretty quiet. What I will say for the rest of this August is be prepared for a lot of thunderstorm outbreaks. But I do not see a lot of support for tropical low pressure system development. I really don't. And it could be a surprising August for many who are looking for an above normal season. As far as going beyond that for fall, because it's El Nino, it's not acting like a typical El Nino, but in a way it is. What I mean by that is that the location of the warmer sea surface temperatures should focus a lot of your strongest convection around Hawaii, but it's more towards the date line. So as far as forcing, it's acting more like a west-based El Nino. But in terms of sea surface temperatures, it's acting more like an east-based El Nino. Strange. Something that's going to keep me on my toes. So when is the fall forecast anticipated to be released? The end of this month. So what I'll probably do is I will issue it after August 15th. I still got some things to work on. But sometime around that, the third or fourth week of August, I'll issue the fall forecast. And then, of course, we go into September forecast and whatnot. But that should be out probably after August 15th. And with that, we will call it a night. I want to thank everyone for joining. I hope I answered plenty of your questions, all your questions, as best as I possibly can. And I'll see you next week. And as always, stay safe out there.